So how much weight and chains should you have relative to the barbell? So, I mean, there's different school of thoughts here, but so before I talk about this, I just want to talk about the two situations in which you could use chains effectively. So you could use chains for hypertrophy purposes in a situation where you want to increase the time under tension of the set. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're doing 8 reps on bench press. Now, 8 reps, you would use your 8 RM on the barbell. So let's say your 8 RM is 100 kilos for 8 reps. So now you do 8 reps with a regular barbell, and then on the 8th rep you fail concentrically, which means you cannot do 9 reps. Now what happens is, because the bench press is a ascending strength curve, which means it's easy on your chest, and as you're pushing it becomes easier and easier, then you should be able to add about 20% of that barbell weight of chains total on the barbell and still be able to do 8 reps because of the accommodating effect of it. I mean, it's going to be a hard 8 reps, maybe you're only going to do 7 reps, but still you should be able to get close to that because of the accommodation of the exercise. So on top of the barbell with the chains, you would have 120 kilos when you're at full extension, so 10 kilograms of chains per side. So in the bottom you have your 100 kilo, which you can do for 8 reps. Then on top you have 120 kilos. So what I mean by why that would be good for hypertrophy, well, not only are you accommodating the strength curve, so you're creating more force output throughout the concentric, but because your concentric is harder, your concentric speed will be technically a little bit slower. So let's say it's 0.8 seconds slower per rep times 8. So now you're adding some time to your set, which we know that time under tension also helps with increasing hypertrophy. So that's one way to use it. Another way, which is my preferred way, is for speed strength purposes. So now you would do the opposite. So let's say that your 8 RM is 100 kilos. Now you have to understand that your limiting factor to generate speed is the strength that you have at your chest. So if instead of using 100 kilos, I use 20% less on the barbell, so I use 80 kilos on the barbell, and then I add the 20% of chains to the barbell. So now it means that on top I have my 8 RM, which is 100 kilos, but in the bottom, when it's harder for me, now I have 80 kilos. So because it's lighter than my 8 RM, this allows me to generate more speed for my concentric to be more explosive. So that's one way I like to do it. Typically, the 20%, so 80% on the bar, 20% on the chains, this is kind of like my starting point. You could actually progress eventually to have less barbell weight and a little bit more chain weight. But in my experience, the 80-20 is a very good starting point, and then you gauge based on your client. So do I use 4-0-x-0 tempo in relative strength macrocycles? Yes, I do. Again, like 4-0-x-0, it tends to be my go-to for a wide range of clients because of all the benefits it gives you on a control standpoint, on a learning standpoint, on a eccentric base standpoint. But for relative strength, it also makes a lot of sense because we know that the rep range that's associated to the strength quality of relative strength is 1 to 5. But we also know that the time under tension of a set associated to relative strength is 1 to 20 seconds. So beyond 20 seconds, what happens is the duration of the sets is starting to become a little too long for the relative strength or the neural component to be efficient for development of relative strength. So with that in mind, if we do the math, if we have 5 reps, which is the highest rep range of relative strength, and we're using a 4-0-x-0 tempo, which is 4 seconds to complete. So 5 reps times 4 seconds, that's 20 seconds. So you see, if you're using the highest rep for relative strength using 40x0 tempo, it puts you at the highest range of time under tension. So mathematically speaking, it also makes sense to use that tempo. So, and again, the X being a intent to maximally accelerate the concentric, also is also beneficial for relative strength, as it allows you to tap in higher threshold motor unit. So to me, it's a win-win situation, which is why I favor 40x0 for relative strength purposes. How would I structure 3 times a day training for the same body part if my goal is hypertrophy? The answer is very, very simple. I would not. I don't think that 3 times a week, 3 times a day is effective at all for hypertrophy for most. I'm not saying there's not the odd few out there who might benefit for 3 times a day training, but honestly, I just don't think it's very effective. It's just a little too much work, a little too big of a dip on the recovery curve, and most people won't be able to recover from that to make real gains. So to me, 2 times a day will be the maximum frequency a day for the same body part you would do if you want to optimize hypertrophy. So how do I periodize for fat loss? So fat loss, here I'm assuming the client that's 20-something% body fat that wants to get down to 10 or 12. For these clients, I like using full body workouts, and if possible, done 4 times a week. With doing full body workouts, the metabolic demand, the metabolic cost, the energy cost is much greater, which is quite beneficial for fat loss purposes. So that's going to be the core of my training, and I'll use methods like German body composition or giant sets, trisets, those more classical bodybuilding techniques, but always in the context of a full body training session. Now, traditionally, when you do periodization, you use the intensities as a gauge to allow for undulating periodization, for example, which is still what I do with fat loss. But the problem with using the intensities for fat loss is once you start using techniques like giant sets and trisets, or even GBC, the problem is the intensity becomes irrelevant. Because, for example, if we're doing a giant set and we have A1, A2, A3, A4, A5 on a quad exercise, although each and every one of these 5 exercises might be a 10 rep prescription, the reality is not all of these 10 reps will be 74% of 1RM, because it's impossible. By the time you get to exercise number 3, 4, and 5, you will have a drop off. So that 10 rep does not represent a 74% on that exercise. So because of that, you cannot accurately use intensities as a gauge of your periodization. So you have to revert to something else, which is why for the purpose of fat loss, when I base my undulations, I base them on total time under tension, which is a reflection. It's a way to target volume, or to show you volume of a training session. So what happens is, let's say I'm doing a German body composition workout in accumulation 1. I'll make sure that my total time under tension for that whole session is really high. It's like at a certain level, let's say 2,000 seconds of time under tension. And then what you do now is, as you're moving on to your intensification phase, you choose another method. So let's say triset. And now you want to make sure that the total time under tension will be less, because now we're in a quote unquote intensification phase. So you cannot afford to have as much volume, as much total time under tension, if you want the average intensity to be higher. So that's why you need to have lower time under tension. Then you're moving on to the next accumulation phase. So now the total time under tension goes up again. So that's how I do it. They're always metabolically demanding methods. They're always full body training sessions, but I undulate the total time under tension of the sessions through a 12-week macro cycle, so that I don't reach a point of diminishing return by driving volume linearly upwards throughout the entire 12-week period. Because at one point, especially considering we're doing full body sessions, if you keep driving volume up and up and up and up and up continuously, you're going to have a really, really hard time recovering, which will highly affect the load you're using, which can also affect the potential or the energy cost of these training sessions. So because of that, I find that undulating the total time retention gives you this like good little middle ground where you can keep on progressing without dipping too low in your recovery. So what are the benefits of using IMCA during the A series? So IMCA, which stands for intended maximal concentric acceleration, is a old school term that basically means that on your concentric tempo prescription, you use a X. And the X means that you try with intent, with your brain, you try to accelerate that concentric as fast as possible, irrespective of the load and the actual velocity. So let's say you were to train at 90% of 1 RM, which would be very, very heavy. Obviously, even if you attempt to lift as heavy as fast as you can, the weight will not necessarily move very, very fast because the load is so high. But that attempt to lift fast will still allow your central nervous system to tap in higher threshold motor units, which we know that fast twitch fibers have more potential for strength and mass than slow twitch fibers. So by using the IMCA on the A series with those big compound multi-joint primary exercises, it allows you to do more effective work on these big bang for your buck exercises because you're training yourself to get better at recruiting high threshold motor units. So to me, using the A series with that purpose is a win-win, especially in the long run. But the thing about IMCA on a coaching perspective, you have to make sure that you cue, when you train your clients, you have to cue it and coach it a lot at first, because a lot of people, they might see the X, they might try to explode on rep 1, on rep 2, but as the set goes on, they tend to forget and then they revert back to just grooving that concentric rep. So if that happens, then you have to purposely give like verbal cues like speed, fast, to really have them accelerate through all these concentric reps for the entire set. So it's something you need to learn and teach, so it becomes a like second nature. Now the thing is, you should only really use this in the A series, because if you do it properly with intent on every set, on every rep, you become very fatigued. So by the time you move to the B series and the C series, you should just use a 1 as your concentric tempo and just like focus on doing all of your reps, because at that point, keep trying to accelerate. It's just most people won't have the bandwidth to be able to cope with that for the whole session. What is my favorite biceps exercise? For me, it's simple. It's the seated dumbbell Zotman curl. I really like that exercise. And one of the main reasons is a lot of people are weak in a pronated grip when they do arm work. They have weak brachioradialis and the Zotman curl. So what happens is on your concentric, you're in a supinating grip, but on the eccentric, you go pronated. So you're stronger supinated, so it allows you to lift a heavier weight than you would if you were to do your concentric pronated. But now once you're on top and you pronate on top and you're going down eccentrically in a pronated grip, now you have slightly more weight than normal, so you're overloading the eccentric part of the brachioradialis. So to me, it's a good, fast way to increase strength of the pronated grip on your bicep work with a big bang for your buck exercise. So try it, the seated dumbbell Zotman curl.